All right, Jeremy asked me to introduce myself, so in case anybody doesn't know who I am, my name is Sam Taggart. I am a board member. Y'all can look up more information about me if you want. For our Giants Are Female, I picked Emily Bache and Claire Sudbury. I don't know if anybody knows them, but they run this thing called the Salmon Coaching Group or Initiative. I forget what they call it. But they teach people how to teach others how to do test-driven development and unit testing and refactoring and all of that. And they teach classes, so you can go take classes from them. I've learned a lot from them. They're also really cool people. All right. So the title of my talk is Stop Straightening Wires, Focus on What Matters. And that may be controversial, and some of you may get triggered. That's probably why Jeremy put me right after lunch, so I can wake you all up. Normally, if you've been to one of my talks, I like audience interaction. For this specific talk, though, I've got a lot of slides. I'm going to try to get through them all. So if you need clarification, if I'm not clear about something, feel free to ask. If you want to add your 2 cents or something, I know there's lots of wise people out here, Alan and Fab and others, who probably have some things to say. My answer is going to be wait till the next slide. So I don't want to say that 50 times. If you still have those comments at the end, we'll find time to have those, or we can talk tomorrow. All right, so I took a rock climbing class recently. And at one point, we were just sitting around, and the instructor asked, are zebras black with white stripes or white with black stripes? Anybody have an idea? Black with white stripes. Anybody else? Both. Okay. Point of the question is, does it matter? How many people care about anything beyond the fact that it's a horse-like animal with black and white stripes that lives in Africa? Right? So the point of the story is the rock climbing guide was trying to make the point that as rock climbers, we like to go climbing and then sit around beers or around the campfire and argue over which knot or which carabiner is the best in this particular situation. And we really only care about 2 questions. Does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And is it safe enough? Because you can always, if you've got 1 carabiner, well, you could put 2 or 3 or 5, or where do you end, right? You could put as many carabiners as you have there, and yeah, that might be safer, but there's some practical point where it doesn't matter anymore. I think us programmers do the same thing. We like to sit around beers or after conferences, and we will argue over things that don't really matter. And really, what matters is, does the code work? Does it solve the problem that it's supposed to solve? And contrary to what Tara says, is it readable enough? I think that you can spend time polishing code forever, but at some point you're like, this is readable enough. So my test is, can someone who didn't write that code glance at it and within a couple seconds figure out what's going on? And if they can do that, you're done. Right? So that's kind of my litmus test. So the premise of my presentation is, we spend a lot of time arguing about whether zebras are black with white stripes or white with black stripes. And a lot of that is around style. What's the best way to do X, Y, Z? As an example, and I will pick on Jim because he's just up here, but Jim posted something about the OpenG library and warnings. And he had 3 different things. And by my definition, they all met the standard there. And there were 200 plus comments arguing over which one was better. And I will admit, I got suckered in. I posted, I like this one the best too. But in reality, if he picks any one of those, they're all fine. It's buried in some library somewhere. It's clearing a warning. It's not really solving the customer's problem. And with all this style stuff, I think we can eliminate a lot of it if we would create an autoformatter. So that's kind of what this presentation is about, and I'm going to build that argument. And really, for me, it's about the opportunity cost. I like clean-looking code. I like nice-looking code. But man, I was talking to, I think it was Cyril, about when I first got into really clean code, I used to sit there and I move everything 1 pixel at a time to get the wires to line up just right and everything lined up right. And at some point I realized there is a diminishing return on investment at some point. And I realized how much time I was wasting with that. And I was like, yeah, there's got to be a better way. And I don't think we should be manually aligning stuff. And this might go with what Jim was presenting about AI automatically updating your block diagrams or whatever. But there's got to be a better way than sitting there manually moving stuff 1 pixel at a time. And I love the phrase opportunistic laziness. You may have heard people say that good coders are opportunistically lazy. We do something several times and we say, hey, you know what? That's something I can automate. Why would I ever do it again? Right? Write the code to automate it, and then you never have to do it again. So, going into style questions, don't worry, we're not going to do too much of this, but anybody got any preferences on which one of these is better? On the left, okay. I know Nattinger with the Nattinger. Sorry if I didn't pronounce it hard enough, Darren. But I know Nattinger and the Nattify tool like on the left and on the right for indicators. The default, I believe, in LabVIEW is on top, and that's what I always liked for a while. I don't think anybody's picking on bottom, but we can get even more pedantic and more choices, because, okay, if we say they're on top, do you like them left aligned, centered, or right aligned? And does it matter if it's a controller or an indicator? And I have seen style guides that even get into what fonts we should use and what font size. And then there's all these discussions around spacing and capitalization and abbreviations and all these other special cases. And we could have a 2-hour presentation just on how to format your indicator labels. And we haven't even left that, and we're still talking about zebras being black or white. There is a term for this. It's called bike shedding. Maybe people have heard of the term. It has something to do with some people designing a nuclear power plant, and they're more concerned about what color to paint the bike shed, because it's much easier to critique that than to make decisions about the actual nuclear power plant. And I think it's much easier to critique style than actual design. So let's just take a fictitious code review, okay? And you've got two types of findings. You've got the style findings on the left, and you've got these architecture, what I call architecture findings, on the right, right? So take a minute and look at those and just get an idea of what they are. Right? On the left, we've got things like missing VI descriptions, things not named quite right, maybe a few extra wire bends, default icon. That's kind of just laziness, but hey, okay. And on the right, we've got real problems, like we've got some circular dependencies, or we've got this giant class that does way too many things, or we've got race conditions. All right, now I'm going to ask you a few questions about that list. Show of hands, which side is easier to spot? If I'm the reviewer, which one requires the least effort to spot? The style stuff. I don't even have to open the VI. I can just go in the project and hover over, oh, blank icon, right? I found my thing. I did my review. Here you go. Here's my detailed review, right? Which one's easier to fix? If I'm the person who's getting the review, which one's like brain dead easy to fix? Style, right? The wrong campaign, that might be a little challenging, but default icon, I can fix that. No description, that's easy. Which one adds more value and makes your code better when you fix it? The architecture, right? Now that doesn't mean these aren't important, right? If your code is so riddled with these that you can't point out and you can't see these big things, by all means, fix these. And you should fix these. But these don't require a code review to fix. You just see them and you fix them. Right? We should be spending our time talking about these things. And if you only have to pick one, pick this side. You'll end up with much better code. Style is not a goal, but a means to an end. Right? So we're not trying to write the best, most prettiest code. I think we forget this someday. But what we're really doing, we're not even really writing code. We're solving problems. And so if you're writing code and it's not solving a problem, you're just playing around. And like, that's cool. I do that sometimes, right? Sometimes I just play around to see what I can do. But really, at the end of the day, we get paid to solve problems, not to write pretty code. Pretty code can help with solving problems, and that's good. But the pretty code is not the goal. And here's another point that I'd like to make, and that is, at some level, the actual choice that we make, right, whether we put the labels on the left or the right, or what font, or what camel or kebab case or whatever, at least from my opinion, does not matter as much as consistency. I would like to see a code base where everything's consistent. Where even if the labels are on the bottom of the terminals, I would rather see that everywhere and have it be consistent, because when I look at it, my eye knows where to look for it. And it's a human tendency that we tend to pick out things that don't belong. And so if you see code and all of a sudden this one has the label somewhere else, your eye's instantly drawn to it and you're asking yourself, why is this one different? Is there something special about it? And the only thing that's special is the person who wrote it that day felt like putting it up there. And that's kind of a waste of time, and it's inefficient. So how do we achieve this consistency today? A lot of people resort to style guides, and this is the style guide book. How many people read this? You're probably showing your age, right? Because this book was written a long time ago. It's still good. It's missing libraries and classes, I believe. It's been a while since I read it, but it's pretty good. It's a thick book. It's several hundred pages. There are a variety of other ones that you can start with. If you don't have a style guide, you can pick one up. NI's got a couple. DQMH Consortium has a couple. Some ones floating around. Style guides are about limiting choices in pursuit of a goal, right? I'm sure most of you know where this saying comes from. You get any color you want as long as it's black, right? Ford was trying to make as many cars as possible and sell as many as possible. Painting them was a complication because now I have to keep all this inventory. Now if nobody wants a green car, I've got a bunch of green cars sitting here, they have to sit here till somebody wants a green car. Oh, somebody broke a door off, they need a new door. Oh, well, this one's the wrong color, right? So he said, hey, let's get rid of all those choices and let's just make as many cars as we can. Right, so he had a goal. And this is a supermarket shelf picture that I got. You might not be able to read that, but there's multiple different types of peaches and multiple different types of fruit salad, and there's light syrup and thick syrup and all this stuff. And places like Sam's Club or Costco, if you've ever been in them, what do they have? They have fruit salad and peaches. There's no other choices. There's no sizes. There's no anything. Because what happens is people get overwhelmed with all the choices, and they end up walking out with nothing. If you give them just 2 choices, it's very easy to pick which one they want, right? Another example of limiting choices for a goal, I don't know how many people are familiar with Southwest, but if you're from the US, you probably know it's an airline. When you run an airline, you have a lot of choices in terms of planes that you can buy. It's mostly Boeing and Airbus. But there's short haul, long haul, medium flight, all this stuff. Southwest was one of the few airlines that said, all we're going to do is 737s, right? When a plane comes in and needs a repair, if they have the part, it fits the plane. It's not, oh, well, we have the part for the other plane. When they need a pilot, any pilot, Southwest pilot, can fly any Southwest plane. They don't have to have 50 different emergency procedures for different planes and configurations. Nope, they're all the same, right? We do this in our code. If you talk about actor framework or DQMH, all it is how do you have parallel loops and how do you send messages between them at the end of the day? And there are multiple ways to do that, and you all probably know multiple ways to do that. You can use things like, God forbid, global variables. You can use notifiers. You can use queues. You can use events. You can use all these things. If you pick one of these frameworks, you're limiting yourself. If you pick actor framework, the way you communicate between actors is you grab an enqueuer and you send a message. DQMH, you send a broadcast or a request, or register for a broadcast or send a request, right? You're giving up all those choices, but you're getting some consistency, and it allows you to build processes around it and standardize a little bit. And there's benefits to that. So let's take a step back. Consistency is one of the goals that we're going for, but what other goals do we have? How do we end up with style guides? How many people have inherited this? This is actually the very first piece. My first experience with LabVIEW was this. You can go back on the forums and find this post. It's from 15 years ago or whatever. I said, what the heck do I do with this? And luckily, I think Ed and some other people on here actually responded to my post. So most of us have inherited code like this, and we're afraid if we don't have a style guide, we're going to end up with code like this, right? Part of it is the fear of that. We would all like code that looks more like this. Now, this is not perfect. I grabbed it off my blog. There's some things, as soon as I picked this, I was like, oh, there's probably some things I should change here. But I think most people would agree. We'd rather inherit this stuff on the, that's left, right? Or right. Oh, yeah, my left, your right. OK, cool. But yeah, we'd rather inherit this. Everyone has their own style. I don't need to tell you who drew these 2 pictures. I'm guessing, I bet somebody can guess. Throw out some names. Yeah, right? But you may have never seen those 2 paintings before. They're somewhat obscure paintings of theirs. If you're an art student, maybe you know those already, right? But they have a very unique style. If you're a lone wolf developer, I'm going to argue you probably don't need a style guide. You probably have a natural style and way that you write code. And as long as you're not producing junk like that giant thing on the left, you're probably OK. Because you're the only one who needs to read or look at your code. But now you end up with, if you're doing anything meaningful, you probably are working with at least one other person. And if you've got Van Gogh and Picasso in the same thing trying to make a painting together, they're going to butt heads, right? But now imagine Van Gogh and Monet trying to do a painting together. They could probably figure out how to make it work, right? So it kind of depends. If you're working with somebody else and you're butting heads a lot, yeah, you probably need to figure that out. If you're both pulling in the same direction, you got some minor differences, that can be OK. As an example, I did a project with Enrique recently. He's DQMH trusted advisor. We use DQMH. Our styles are very similar. We didn't need a style guide. We wrote our code, and his code was slightly different. He did a few little things differently than I did, but I was OK with that. I can figure that out, right? So at this point, we don't necessarily still need a style guide. But when you get to this, you definitely need a style guide. Because even if these are 100 impressionist painters and they're trying to put a painting together, you're going to end up with people going in all different directions. So you need something to keep the chaos at bay. And there's some other stuff that we're trying to avoid, too, when we put in style guides. I just made this history up, but I've actually seen this in Git repos, and maybe some of you have, too. Fabiola talks about code archaeology. Right? You can see that, oh, somebody learned that notifiers were cool, so they put notifiers all throughout the code. And somebody else learned that events were cool, so they put events all throughout the code. And you see commits that are just, I realigned all the terminals because I like them better this way. And that just becomes noise in your Git history. It's not adding anything to your project, right? And you don't really want a bunch of these, and particularly if you have two people who disagree and they go back and forth, and one person checks it out and changes everything one way, and then the next person checks it out and changes everything back. Right? We don't want all this. That's not adding value. And another thing with style guides is we can avoid, there are some issues that are caused by style. Anybody recognize this pattern? What's the problem that's going to happen? OK, well, there's the error problem. There's actually two problems there. I did not intend for the second one. But the ref num, right? So if this data in is 0, and we have a valid file ref in, this for loop executes 0 time, outputs the default for that terminal, and you drop your ref. And now your file is just hanging there, and you can't access it anymore. Right? So VI Analyzer, which we're going to talk about in a minute, can catch that. And having a style guide that says, hey, don't pass references in and out of loops without a shift register. Or don't pass errors in and out without shift registers either, unless that's intentional. So we can catch some of those type of problems, too, with style guides and VI Analyzer. So here's what I have as a list of what we're trying to achieve with style guides. Consistency, avoiding ugly, unreadable code, creating code that's easier to change and less buggy. I didn't specifically say this, but like when your code is cleaner and there's less going on and it's less crowded, there's less places for bugs to hide, less places for misunderstanding. We avoid squabbles and noise in Git. We avoid some of those easy-to-spot bugs. And another big thing is we make developers interchangeable. So kind of when you got two people and they're working on the project, like if one goes away and the other one can take over, right? If you work in a team and someone in your team's going on vacation, you grab someone from the team next to you and pull them over. And if you're using the same framework and you've got the same style, they can pick things up and probably just carry on. So those are kind of our goals. But we don't get this for free. Style guides are expensive. They take time to create. I don't know how long Bloomy took to write that book, but that was probably a while. I don't know how many of you guys have created style guides. Anybody want to share how much time you spent creating your style guide? Anybody have an estimate? Are we talking like hours? Days, months?
We never finished.
We never finished, OK. It requires a lot of decision, right? So every little thing you got to decide on now, because you're writing it down, so you might as well cover everything. You know, it's hard. If you have vague rules, then are they really that valuable? Like, you know, you got guidelines, but like, you know, it requires some sort of management because it's got to be a living document because LabVIEW adds new features. And what do you do with those new features? Getting consensus is hard. I have difficulty remembering all the rules. Right? If you guys hand me a 50-page document of rules for how to write LabVIEW code, I'm not going to remember them all. And then it requires enforcement, and this is what leads us to VI Analyzer. But we're not going to go there directly. So short piece of story time. So I talked about working with Enrique. I also worked with Casey recently, and we started a project. And Casey sent me his style guide. I asked for it because Casey does more actor framework stuff, and I figured they're doing things differently than what I normally do, so I want to see like what their style is. And they sent me a 35-page, I think, Google Doc. It took me half an hour to read it, so not too bad. And I'm reading through the rules, and they all make sense. But I'm noticing that a lot of these rules go against ingrained habits that I have. And I'm like, this is going to be hard. And there's a lot of little nitpicky things, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to remember any of this. And so we talked about, like, how do we actually enforce this? Because I actually had good intentions. I want to follow your style guide, but like this is going to be hard, and I'm going to screw up. And so we settled on just doing pair programming. And that worked just fine. Because I'm pairing with Casey and Adam, and when we do something that's kind of out of the norm, and I do something out of the norm, like, no, we named this way. OK, cool, and we fix it. And it's pretty easy. But a lot of people immediately jump to doing code quality enforcement through code reviews. right? It seems like a natural thing. Let's sit down and go over the code before you commit it. Let's all sit down and comment on it, and you end up with a lot of WTFs going on. But this is kind of bike shedding again, because we're taking valuable time that we're all together and talking about the code, and what we should be talking about are like questions like, why'd you choose that framework? Why are you using that? Why'd you pick that data type? What customer problem is this code actually solving? Do you consider these edge cases? Instead, we're arguing about zebras. We're talking about where your indicator labels are. And this is a point where Fab would chime in normally and say, don't do that. Let VI Analyzer be the bad guy, and let VI Analyzer yell at them, right? Which is where we're going to go with VI Analyzer. So let's wait around for a while VI Analyzer runs. And runs and runs and runs. It's a bad joke. But if you ever run it, if you run it out of the box with the default set of tests, it runs forever. And it's very noisy. One of the issues you immediately run into with VI Analyzer is if you've got a very detailed set of rules in your style guide, there's not a test for every rule you have. So you go to the VI Analyzer Enthusiast document, and there's a ton of third-party things here to check stuff. But you're still going to end up having to write your own VI Analyzer test for some stuff. So that takes energy and effort, too. And so VI Analyzer comes with costs as well. So we got the costs of the style guide. We also got costs to VI Analyzer. It's slow. It's overwhelming. It requires scripting skills. I often end up manually adding pacifiers. For example, I do a lot of unit testing. My unit test VIs, I don't bother with icons or descriptions because I'm never calling them as sub-VIs. But if I run VI Analyzer on my project, it complains about every single one. So now I have to go spend all this time adding something that adds no value to me, but makes VI Analyzer happy. Why? Fixing issues is also an iterative process. Oh, you got too many wire bends. Great. Let me go rearrange the block diagram a bunch to get rid of those wire bends. Oh, crap. Now I moved all kinds of stuff around. Now I got to go run VI Analyzer again. And oh, I broke some other rule when I did that. And now you got to keep doing it. The last two are actually really big for me, though. And I don't know that enough people talk about this, but what do you do with failures? If you have VI Analyzer tests and you say, hey, if this test fails, do you break the build? OK, well, like there's several hundred tests. What if like one issue I ran into was fonts? Fonts on one machine, you run it on the build machine, and the fonts are slightly different. Oh, no, something moved by a pixel, and now it overlaps with something else, and oh, my God, what do you do? And it's a pain in the butt. I know Fab is going to have some comment about how you can fix that, and that you can talk about that later, and that's totally cool. But also, it doesn't play well with legacy code, right? If I've got my own VI Analyzer test and I'm running code from scratch, I can adhere to the style guide from the beginning, and that's cool. But now I inherit some code from Alan. Alan's style is different than mine, and his code works, and it's fine. But I want to incorporate it in my project, and I run VI Analyzer on it, and it finds 2,000 things that are different or wrong or whatever. According to my style guide, not wrong, but am I going to go fix all that, right? Does it make sense? Does it add value to the project? Does it do anything for the end customer if I fix that? Maybe it adds some value to the next guy that inherits my code because now it's all consistent, but it doesn't really add any immediate value to the customer. It's hard to justify doing that. And also, you're changing all these things manually, so there's a chance that as you're changing these things, you actually break the code. And if Alan's code doesn't have good tests, which Alan wouldn't, but maybe some of you other people don't have great tests, and I break your code while I'm trying to refactor to make VI Analyzer happy when it worked to begin with, that's just pointless and stupid. I'm sorry. That's just why would you do that? And biggest thing, I wish that VI Analyzer just had a button that I could press that says fix. And honestly, I wish there wasn't even a button. I wish it just ran and it said, oh, these things don't match, let me fix it. And I didn't have to touch it. This is from the DQMH validator. So they have a fix issue button. Doesn't fix all of them, but there are many of the issues. You run it, it finds an issue, and there's just a button, you click it, it goes away. Everybody's happy. So is all this cost really worth it? I'm going to argue no. Right? So style guides and VI Analyzer do help us achieve these goals. There's no doubt. If you use a style guide and VI Analyzer, your code will be consistent. You'll hopefully avoid ugly, unreadable code. You create code that's easier to change and less buggy. That assumes that you're actually doing good design and you're actually catching those architecture issues too. But it does all this, but is it worth the cost? And can we get the same benefits without all that cost? And I think it starts with limiting choices in pursuit of a goal. And the better way is an autoformatter. So why would an autoformatter be better? Number one, it's consistent. It's proactive versus reactive. My biggest issue with VI Analyzer is I have to write the code. Assuming you're doing it as part of your CI process, you write the code, you commit it, the code's already in the repository. VI Analyzer complains and says, hey, here's all this list of things to go. Then I have to go take energy to go reactively change all these things, and it's a cyclical process. I would rather just fix it once up front. I write it, I click save, the autoformatter does its job, and everything looks good, and I'm happy. If you're doing it right, and it's like just embedded in the process, it's in the background. You don't even notice it. It plays well with legacy code, because I don't have a problem with running formatter on legacy code, because all that code Alan gave me, yeah, it's going to change it all, but it's automated, and hopefully all those things are tested that they're not going to break his code, and it's just going to run. That's fine by me. And it frees up time to focus on all these important things, right? And we're avoiding all these. So I got into autoformatters through doing some Python code. Anybody ever code in Python and use something called black? So here's an experience I've had in Python, and maybe some of you have. I'm entering a dictionary for something, right? I'm writing code, and I need a dictionary. I start typing in D equals, and I put in the brackets or whatever, and I start typing it out. And Python lines are supposed to be, I think, 83 characters. Well, I'm not counting 83 characters. I'm just typing, right? And then I realize I'm past the end of the line, but then I got to figure out, well, where do I break it? Do I break it in between the elements, or like, where is it acceptable, and how many things can I put on a line, and how do I indent it? With black and PyCharm, I just keep typing. I hit the end of the line, I hit enter, and my screen disappears for a couple of milliseconds and pops back up, and everything's formatted correctly. It's broken at the correct place. Now I've got instead of 1 line, it's on 4 lines, but it's all perfect. And I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. It just does it. And any color you like, so you can see where I got the Henry Ford reference. Black itself actually has 2 parts. So there is a command line version where you just type in black and you give it a folder, and it just goes and does its thing on that folder of code. Really useful for legacy code or something, or somebody hands you a project and you're like, this is a mess, just run it and it's done. It also there's a tool called Black Connect. So Black has this daemon process that runs in the background and over HTTP, over localhost, and basically PyCharm, you set it up to autosave, so every time you complete a line, it saves the file, and when it saves the file, it sends it off to Black. Black runs its thing, and it pops back, and it repopulates in PyCharm, and everything just magically reformats itself. If you've ever experienced this, it's freaking awesome. I 100% wish we had this experience in LabVIEW. I would pay money for this, and I would pay good money for this. So much so that I'm willing to invest a bunch of my own time to try to create it, as you'll see later. The closest thing we have in LabVIEW is Nattify. So I don't know if Darren's still here somewhere. I assume he is. Yeah. So if I say something wrong, please correct me. But my okay. So Darren started working as TSE, I believe, and he was getting a bunch of code from customers. And sometimes it wasn't formatted the way he wants. So he wrote a little quick drop shortcut that does all these things. And there's a list of 10 things there or whatever. And they're just simple scripting things that he runs that turns off auto error handling, turns off auto grow, changes the front panel color back to the default, and it does all these things. And you can get this screen. So it's a quick drop shortcut. You install it, Control Space, Control N. It'll Nattify your VI. And if you type something in the quick drop window before you do Control N, it'll bring up this window so you can turn some of the things off. Because you may want to turn some of them off sometimes. Right? So for example, the arrange front panel, if it's a UI that your user is going to see, you probably don't want to rearrange the front panel. That would be bad. So I kind of took this as inspiration, and I heavily borrowed from Darren. Hope you don't mind. But I created something called Blue. But before we get there, one of the things that was hard for me, and it may be hard for some of you about embracing an autoformatter, was letting go. Because I used to always on top for the terminal labels. I don't know why. It was just the default out of LabVIEW, and that's what I saw all the time, and my eyes were just used to it, and I'm like, that's what I like. And the Nattify tool put them all to the left. And at first, I absolutely hated that. But quickly, I realized that I didn't care anymore, because I didn't have to worry about all this other stuff that just went away, and I was like, I can deal with that. I'm willing to give up some of my options for a goal. I'm willing to limit my options for a goal. right? Limiting choices in pursuit of a goal. And some people are like, oh, well, I'm creative. I want you to be creative, but I want you to be creative in how you solve the customer's problem, not in what color you paint the block diagram, right? You have lots of creativity in you. Use it for things that are actually worthwhile. Use it for the things that you're actually getting paid for. And so this is Blue. It's a GCLI tool, so GCLI, Blue, and then 2 dashes to kind of separate the arguments. It's like a peculiarity of GCLI, and dot means this current directory. And this just takes everything in this directory and runs Blue, and it processed 17 files, formatted 17 of them, and had 0 errors. Simple, easy. I had a little color there, thanks to Felipe Silva. And that's it. And you can do it like that. It's really simple. You can specify various files. It works very well. I tried, Felipe helped me. I wanted to get it to run automatically, and that's actually really hard. Felipe had a thing where he had a file watcher in Python that would watch a directory, and then when something in that directory changed, you could run a CLI command. And so I tried to incorporate that, and I got kind of far, but there's some issues with it. It doesn't quite work, so I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do that. But there is a version of this that you can try out, and it kind of works, and I'm happy to talk to you about some of the caveats with that. But if you want to get started with this, it's really easy. It's on VIPM. You can go download it. It's quick and easy to install. There's a link to the repository on the VIPM page. There is a very detailed, probably one of the more detailed READMEs that you'll see, and it talks about all kinds of stuff. I'm going to walk you through a couple things that are important to note. So some of you might be worried about a few things. Some of you are afraid of the CLI or don't like typing in text or whatever. That's fine. I get it. We're LabVIEW programmers. We like drawing things. I did put a little tool in the tools menu per Enrique's request. You just open it up. It opens up this window. You press format, and it formats all the VIs in your project. I plan on adding more features to this, but I haven't gotten there yet. So if you have ideas for what this window should look like, let me know. Something that you might wonder is GUIs, right? I've got these GUIs. I don't want to rearrange my front panel or change front panel colors or any of that. This just happens transparently. The tool figures out if this is a GUI or not based on things like, do you have subpanels? Do you have tab controls? Do you have splitter bars? Have you changed the display properties? If you've done any of those things, it says this is a GUI. We're not going to run any of the GUI stuff. We won't mess up your nice fancy GUI. So you don't even have to worry about that. And if you're still worried, there's another option for that in a second. The other question might be, will it change how my code runs? Well, it does affect auto error handling and separate compiled code. So that may cause some problems, but there's a way to deal with that. There's 3 different ways to ignore specific tests. So if you have a GUI and you're like, hey, I don't trust this thing to automatically detect that it's a GUI, you can add a bookmark that says blue ignore GUI. It ignores all the GUI steps. You can put blue ignore files in a directory, and it'll tell it to ignore all these steps for this particular directory, kind of like a get ignore file. And if you're calling for the command line, you can tell it directly to ignore certain steps. So if you're worried, I don't like this one thing that blue does, but I like everything else, you can still use it. So how can you get involved? Some ways to help. Try it out. It's got some downloads, but I'd like to see a lot more downloads. I would like to get a lot more feedback before I start investing all this time and energy in it. I want to know that I'm on the right track. I want to know what type of features I should add to the tools menu GUI. What type of steps do you think are good to add? If anybody's got any ideas on how to run it automatically, I would love for NI to add an on-save hook to the project provider in LabVIEW. You could go vote for that. That would make it really easy. Because part of the problems I have with the Python thing is it runs outside LabVIEW, and that in and of itself causes a ton of problems. If I could run it from inside LabVIEW, that would be much better and nicer. So I don't know. It seems like a reasonable thing that ought to be able to be done, but I'm not a LabVIEW engineer. Greg can probably tell us why that's not possible or something. Hopefully you can tell me that it is possible, but I'll have to have that discussion with him. And I'm looking to add more steps. Right now, it just does the Nattify steps because that was quick and easy. I had the scripting code. I knew Darren wrote it. I knew it was very performant. I knew it worked because lots of people use the Nattify stuff. They like it. So I'm like, hey, this is pretty popular. But I have a whole bunch of ideas in Darren's presentation yesterday, maybe more ideas. Like, if you find an empty string constant, replace it with the string constant. If you find an array that's only got 3 elements and the thing's sized directly to it, add a blank one. So like you could do things like that. Simple things, like some of the things I'm thinking of adding is you can hide the event terminal for event cases where you're not using them. Why not go through and just automatically hide them? Or hide the terminal for loops, the iteration terminal, yes. Yeah, hide those. If you're not using them, why do they need to take up block diagram space? Hide them. So there's lots of little things like that we can do automatically to just clean up our block diagrams, make them more readable. I know the thing said straightening wires. Straightening wires is actually really hard because it requires moving a bunch of stuff around. But there's a lot of stuff that this can do without straightening wires that will make your block diagrams way more readable very easily. And a lot of them are just like a couple little scripting nodes and it's done. So I think that's the end. How am I doing on time? I was worried about running out of time, and I am flying. OK. Questions, comments? I feel like that was like word vomit. Yeah, comments over here. And this is a time where you can all pick apart my argument and say, Sam, I love VI Analyzer, whatever. Anybody who has any comments? I'm sure Fab is running to the front to make some comments. And it's not that I dislike VI Analyzer. Like, it has a purpose, and there are certain things that it works well for. I just don't think that enforcing style is the best use of it. I think Norm has the mic, but you can be next, Alan. Maybe. I don't know who's running mics.
There you go. Got it right there. I'm not seeing a link there for the Git repo, and I'm also on your website, and it's not showing the Git repo there either.
If you go to vipm.io, there is a link there. So if you scroll down, there should be a link on
to the Git stuff there too, not just the package. Cool.
Yeah, there is a link to the Git stuff from there.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide those. If anybody else wants like a direct link, that's fine too. But I just thought from there you could get everywhere you need to go. Has anybody here actually used it? There's been like a couple hundred people who've downloaded it. Anybody actually use it? No? Okay.
I've used Nattify before.
All right, yeah, how many people have used the Nattify? Yeah. Yeah, everybody I've talked to who uses it absolutely loves it, so.
Norm stole my question.
Okay, so what you invited me to talk, so I'm
I didn't think I needed to invite you to talk. I figured that would happen anyway.
So
but yes, I figured I was getting ahead of it.
So the VI Analyzer test, I agree that the ones that come out of the box are mostly style and do not include fixes, but that doesn't mean that you cannot create your own VI Analyzer test that include fixes. The DQMH Consortium has a test suite. And also has the style guideline. The style guideline is free, and in the color coding, it shows which things can be addressed with VI Analyzer test, and you can buy the test suite. And in those cases, we do have tests that can fix things.
No, actually, I had forgotten about that, so that is great, and thank you for pointing that out. One limitation, and I think Darren pointed this out, I think it was, or maybe it was Hunter, but VI Analyzer only works at the VI level, so I'd also like to add to this some things that work at the project or library level as well. I am sure there are, and that's nice. So. Yeah. No, but yeah, there are things like, I think you were talking about, like if there's a library member that's outside the library folder, grab it and move it in. There are some things that you do have to be a little bit careful about, because that's possibly more than style, because something could be calling that based on path, and now you've moved the path, and so there are some areas where there are some things that you can do that appear to be style changes that aren't necessarily style changes. But you should have good tests, too.
Okay.
So actually, before you test this out, do yourself a favor and make sure you're using Get and you have everything set, and like run it. And if you don't like it, roll it back and run some tests to make sure that it hasn't broken your code.
And there are also,
don't blame me if you don't.
There are also VI Analyzer tests that are not just style. I can tell you that in my history as a consultant, only one time I had a customer curse at me. And it was because the first person I was working with, the guy, we sent him the software. I had done the code review. It passed everything. And then the guy runs it. And the first thing he does is cancel the file dialog, right? So error 43 was not handled. So he got a big error 43 not handled. And for me, that was something that was obvious that I didn't even thought about checking. So one of the tests that we have in the test suite checks if you're handling error 43 on the file dialog. So there are things that you can do that are not necessarily style, but actually will save you from bugs in your code, like wires under array functions. So it's not just style. There are also things that could be addressed with VI Analyzer tests for the functionality of your code.
Yes, no, that is actually a very good point, which is why I'm not saying that VI Analyzer is useless. It certainly has some use cases. So,
Sam, you did have a slide in the beginning that says, does the actual choice of label location, font, camel versus kebab, etc., matter as much as consistency?
yes,
Did you mean to say that consistency is important?
I think consistency is more important than any particular choice. So I would rather have somebody make a choice that I disagree with and be consistent about it than just be all over the place. Yes.
So if you have multiple people contributing and you don't have some style guides or rules or whatever, how do you envision them to be consistent?
Well, exactly. The auto formatting is what gives you the consistency. But if you only have 2 people, I'm not sure that consistency needs to be like the biggest thing, right? Because if I'm working with Enrique and I know that, hey, he likes to save this particular VI in this folder, it doesn't have to be the same place I do. It's okay, because it's just the 2 of us and we know each other's style and we can adapt, right? It might be better if it was standard, but it takes effort to create that style guide and stuff, and so we can agree to disagree on that, and that's okay. We might also agree that, hey, you know what, it is easier if they're both together, and we can informally agree on that without actually writing a style guide. I can just say, Enrique, can you put that over here? Okay. Right? Like, I don't think you need to add process just to add process. Right? You need to add process to prevent the chaos. And if there's no chaos, then there's no need for process in my mind. Oh, sorry, Alan.
I think one of the pieces that's missing to make this really easy is the diff side. Is that if I can run blue and then see like, oh, here's the 6 properties and 4 things it changed, but if I run that and I get 300 VI changes in my big repo and like, I have to trust that it only made smart decisions, or I have to go inspect each one. And so I think if, maybe the tool could tell you what it changed, with some kind of script, or if we can just solve some of the diff problems that we were talking about yesterday where, in my pull request, it says, yep, this was just a blue auto format. All it changed was, it fixed a label formatting, and then I don't have to like also review that and spend my hours verifying that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could break that down and just do it like folder by folder, like if a folder, or run it on a folder. If you have a big project, it's got a bunch of folders, run it in one folder and you get like 20 change VIs, run that through your thing, look at it, okay, great, run through the next ones. I think also like, if you've run it a bunch of times, then you gain some trust as you've seen it run. You're like, okay, yeah, I trust that it's not breaking my code. But there's also the possibility that like somebody adds some new step to it and suddenly that step breaks your stuff. So always like, use, get, but yeah, it does cause problems but I would recommend like doing that if you're going to run it on a big thing of file, do that as its own separate commit and get, and then if it breaks something, you just revert it back, and then you can figure out what's wrong.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, style is a just enough proposition. Have just enough style to achieve whatever value you think it's going to bring. Consistency is important if you've got more than a very small number of people involved in your project, right? Because I want to be able to look at your code and know what I'm looking at. And I tell people in class, it's like, the important thing about a style guide is that you have one. I don't care what's in it. And don't spend forever. I mean, we really did. I worked on a style guide at N.I. once. We never finished because we got to nattering over details and it was dumb. So it's a just enough, I think you've nailed it. It's a just enough proposition. How much do you need to make it easy to write and deploy your code?
I think the work of art is not the code itself, but what the code does. The problem that it solves, that's where you want to apply your creativity. You want to make that your work of art.
I agree.
And not the actual style of the code itself.
I agree, and I like the idea of automating away a lot of these stupid things. I will say that sometimes I straighten my wires as just sort of a Zen experience.
Yeah, no, and there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes, like, I don't know, for really tiny VIs, like accessor VIs, this may be unpopular opinion, but I just hit auto cleanup and I glance at it. If it looks okay, I close it and I never think about it again. But larger VIs, like at some point they get large enough, I'm like, okay, I can't do that anymore. I sit and I straighten it out. But that's my personal style. So some people, like, they'd see this small VI with like 4 or 5 nodes and the wires aren't straight and that would drive them nuts. Me, I'm like, it's a corner case. I've got a good icon. I've got a good name. I can tell what it does. If I need to open it up and look at it, I can figure it out pretty quickly. I don't care.
Okay, York told me not to go against the windmills, but I cannot help myself. anybody can, I was going to say write code, but we're in LabVIEW, so anybody could wire code that the computer can run and works. It takes a special ability to wire code that your team members, yourself in 10 years, can understand what it's doing. So it is important that it works and it does the thing, but you're going to spend a lot more time debugging, troubleshooting, adding features than writing it the first time. So be kind to your future self, spend a little bit of time on adding reminders that are going to help you when you come back in a couple of months or years to add features or to troubleshoot or to debug. And when the code is messy and it's hard to read, it makes that job very difficult.
I'm not necessarily opposed to what you're saying. What I'm opposed to is putting in the effort. I would rather that an autoformatter just took care of that for me.
It's a just enough proposition. Do just enough to achieve that goal. What do you need to do to make it so you can read this code later? What do you need to do to make it so that this other person on your team in 6 months can understand it? You know, use style to reinforce the things that we have to do, like the style guide says, put a shift register here. Comments are good, but you can be pedantic about this to the point of seriously diminishing returns pretty quickly.
Well, back to the rock climbing example. I don't know if anybody's here is a rock climber, right? But like, you can always put more carabiners on, right? But what's the standard? It's 2 opposite and opposed, because once you reach that, like, there's no way that rope's coming out. So like, adding 4 more carabiners adds no more value, but it adds more complexity. And at some point, I think you can get to the point where you're trying so hard to make your code clean that you're like adding more complexity, you're putting in all this effort, and you're not adding value. So yes, you need to get to the point, as Fab said, where your future self and all your teammates can understand it, but I don't think that has to be perfect code. I think I give people credit. We can understand code that's less than perfect, okay? There's a possibility there might be some misunderstandings there. It's not always perfect, but like, it doesn't need to be perfect every time. Okay, 1 minute. Any last questions, comments? Anyone other than Fab want to tell me I'm crazy? I'm trying. Okay, cool. I'm happy to be done. Cool. Oh, and if anybody want to help contribute to this, Casey had mentioned the mobbing thing. I plan on showing up and working on this there. So if this is interesting, come show up.